of all the CFMs. This is a little bit dated now, it's a couple years old, but in the country, you see North Carolina and Texas, Illinois, some of the other states that have the A. That means that they have their own state accredited program, and North Carolina is fortunate to have that. We used to have a North Carolina specific exam, but when we were working with ASFPM to go to the digital exam, we made the decision to switch back to the national exam to facilitate that process and make it easier. Giving a quick overview, again, this is going to be a closed book exam. There's a 3-hour time limit, 120 multiple guess questions, and there are some exercises as those questions dealing with mapping and elevation certificates, and the passing score is 70%. The exam is broken down into different categories or topics. You can see those there. Floodplain mapping is 20 to 25% of the questions. Regulatory standards, 20 to 25%. Administrative procedures, 15 to 20%. Flood insurance, 10 to 15. Hazard mitigation, 10 to 15, as well as natural and beneficial functions of the floodplain. Then we have overall context of floodplain management, 5 to 10%. So it's just a mixture of questions there. Right now, and I don't think they've changed it, but the exam did not include risk rating 2.0 or the new methodology as far as regulatory questions or anything like that. Skip this one.
Back up to that just a minute.
What's it? Board of Regents.
So do not stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning and study for this exam. Because you're going to be tired and wore out. Your mind won't think. So go in, get you dinner, don't go out and get slobbered and not eat. Okay, please. Because Bill doesn't tolerate that in the morning. Nonetheless, study what you're going to study, close your book, and go to bed. Get your good night's rest. Come back in the morning, get your coffee, get your water, whatever you guys have, get your refreshed mind, get your mind clear, forget about home, forget about work, let it soak in, okay? Then about a week or so, however long this new digital is, you're looking for an envelope like this. Not the one like this. Y'all tracking? This one's got that paper in it. This one's got that certificate in it, okay? And it all starts with you. I've been here, Steve's been here, it's been a long time, but we've done this. So don't come in here staying up. If you don't know it by tonight, by the time you eat supper, guess what? Guess what? It is what it is. Most of you will see things on this exam, oh, I just did that, or I know about this. So don't beat yourself up tonight studying for this test till 2 a.m. in the morning, and then go to sleep for 3 hours and get up at 6 and get yourself prettied up to come down here, take this test. Get up in the morning, put your blue jeans on, put your t-shirt or your sweatshirt on, and your overcoat and your pocket, and bring your gloves, and come on in, and Bill will take care of it. See, Bill's like me, he's old and cold. We'll try to get this regulated here in a little bit. Skinny, old and cold. But seriously, all jokes aside, don't beat yourself up tonight till 2 a.m. in the morning studying for this test. Go ahead, sir.
All right. Just a quick overview. Floodplain manager job duties include but are not limited to regulation and administrative procedures, customer service activities, mitigation, preparedness, and disaster response activities. So some of those we've seen presentations on throughout the conference so far. All right, so you can review your local regulations. ASFP's not going to have your local regulations on their exam, but they might talk about state and federal. They're definitely going to, they may allude to the local requirements. So just keep that in mind. Looking at your process for floodplain development permits, participation in community assistance visits or community assistance contacts, site inspections, maintaining your permanent files and documents. Again, National Flood Insurance Program requires that you maintain your records in perpetuity We don't purge those files, they stay forever. Interpret and implement floodplain ordinances and address floodplain violations of our ordinance. Coordinate floodplain activities with other agencies, reviewing elevation certificates, and they will go over, there will be some EC related questions on the exam. Implementation or evaluation of higher regulatory standards. Review variance requests. Understand wetland protection and associated stormwater regulations. And substantial damage and substantial improvement. That's a big one. When you're dealing with your customers, you need to inform them of some of the natural and beneficial functions of the floodplain. You know, that's there for a reason, to help convey that flood water. We don't necessarily want to block it all up with the development. Provide information on flood insurance, eligibility, policy types, mandatory purchase requirements. Information on flood proofing. Sometimes we don't, always elevate non-residential structures. We can dry flood proof those. Increased cost of compliance.
Let me stop there just a minute. If you need insurance policy or repetitive loss information, like how many policies are in your...
How many of you are from the coastal area? Like 2, okay? So, because this is a national exam, national program, even those of you that are here in the western part of the state or central part of the state, you still need to know about the Coastal Barrier Resources Act and how that impacts flood insurance. And also how to estimate base flood elevations for projects in both riverine and coastal areas. So it's a little different. Then we talk a little bit about mitigation. If you understand the community rating system, FEMA's mitigation programs, and cost share, that's probably one of the questions about cost sharing for those grants. Again, some of the new stuff like BRIC were not included in the exam, to my understanding, but doesn't mean they haven't updated it since then. Developing hazard mitigation plans and implementing those plans with mitigation actions. Working with ICS for disaster declaration and federal assistance. Participating in disaster response activities. Again, you got to do those damage assessments, go back out and make sure you're permitting everything, collect high water marks like Gary discussed earlier this week. Look at those substantial damage and substantial improvements, and also work to mitigate your repetitive loss and severe rep loss. Moving on to exam resources. Most of you should have already had this. FEMA 480 and some of these other publications can help you prepare for the exam. There will likely be questions about Executive Order 11988 and 11990. Some of the other information that's out there, substantial damage desk reference, and the FEMA elevation certificate. And just understand that FEMA periodically revises this elevation certificate. You may not see the absolute current version in the exam, but it will be the previous version or something close. The main point is trying to understand what data is in that form and where you would place those different elevations and can help complete that data. We'll talk a little bit about regulations. You've already signed up for the exam, so you should already be aware of ASFPM's website. So we'll skip kind of through this. They do have on-demand learning, so there are training for those of you that are not taking the exam tomorrow. You may want to investigate some of these additional courses. Some are free and some are fee-based, but the free ones are fairly good and should help you get ready. There's also a virtual library, the Flood Science Center at floods.org. We already did this. Sorry, there are duplicate slides here. Oh, it's going the wrong direction. Okay, here we go. So I'll give an overview of the NFIP and do a few things with these slides. The idea is not to go through death by PowerPoint for you all. It's really just a refresher. The main purpose of this course through the rest of the day here is if you all have questions. So if there's specific things that you all need to know or aren't sure about, then this is the time to ask those questions and we can go over it. I will kind of rip through some of these slides, but if we need to pivot and go to something else, want to use your time. We're not hijacking you in here. So at any time you need to leave or feel like leaving, it's up to you, okay? So we're here to answer questions, and that'd be the primary purpose. But I do want to cover a few items just to refresh you on the regulations in particular, a couple other things to help get ready for the exam. So, main purpose of the National Flood Insurance Program is obviously to minimize flood losses, right? And they're enforced through the regulations in the Title 44 of the Code of Federal Regulations, parts 59 through 79. This is a unique program in that it is a federal program that is enforced at the what level? Local level, right? There are some states that have state permitting, but not many, and North Carolina is not one of them. Participation is voluntary for the community, but it is a requirement to have the sale of NFIP insurance in your community. We often see this, the core elements shown as a three-legged stool. We have identification of flood hazards, what they're calling mitigation, or the sort of regulatory framework, how we're dealing with managing the risk, and then also the flood insurance piece. Again, the goals are to reduce loss of life and property from flooding, reduce the rising disaster cost, relief cost, and as we saw with Helene, it was billions of dollars worth of damage. So there's some things that we just can't avoid, but overall, hopefully we can reduce that day-to-day losses or less sort of severe events. Increase the importance of mitigation, or more importantly, look at our planning and restoring and protecting the natural resources and natural functions of the floodplains. We'd like to decrease our taxpayer-funded disaster costs, but again, bad things happen, and we continue to see a lot of events in the news all the time. Reauthorization. The program does need to be reauthorized by Congress. I already mentioned this earlier this week. Again, during a lapse, provided there's funding in the pot, valid claims will be paid. So people that have an active policy will still be covered. But anyone that is buying a new policy or needs to renew a policy, that will not happen until it's reauthorized. Looking at some of the floodplain management principles, sound floodplain management requires setting goals and objectives, sharing the decision-making across governments, mitigating against flood damages, establishing incentives and disincentives, sustaining a coordination process, and evaluating your process continuously. So if it's not working, make an adjustment. In order for a community to join the National Flood Insurance Program, they have to adopt a resolution of intent to maintain, enforce adequate land use and control measures and cooperate with FEMA. It also needs to adopt floodplain management regulations that meet at least the minimum requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program. The role of the community deals with the permitting process, inspection of development and making sure it's compliant with your local ordinances. It's not just sitting in your desk and hoping it turns out right after you issue the permit. You go out there and take a look at it. Maintain those records. Assist in the preparation and revision of the flood maps. So when our group comes out to do what we call discovery now, we'll get input from local communities on improving the maps in areas that have higher priorities for updates. And then also helping your residents or citizens in your communities obtain information on flood hazards, map data, flood insurance, and proper construction measures. There are sanctions for non-participation. So if a community is either suspended from the program that was in the program, or they have flood hazards identified and then don't choose to join the program, no federal grants or loans for development in the special flood hazard area under any federal program. There's no disaster assistance to repair what would have been insurable structures located in the special flood hazard area. No federal mortgage insurance or loan guarantees for properties in the special flood hazard area. And federally insured or regulated lenders must notify the applicants that the property is in the special flood hazard area and it's not eligible for federal disaster assistance. Any questions about that? All right, key legislation. You will see this, I almost guarantee it, maybe not, but National Flood Insurance Act of 1968 established this National Flood Insurance Program, required mapping of flood-prone areas, and made flood insurance available to communities that met those floodplain management criteria. So this has kicked it off, 1968. Then in 1973, we had the Flood Disaster Protection Act. It represented a significant expansion of the provisions of the program, accelerated the flood insurance studies, so that's the mapping, required notification to communities of flood-prone identification, it created the mandatory purchase requirement relative to federally backed loans and mortgages. So that's the main piece there, is that it created that mandatory purchase requirement, which makes the lender responsible if it's not taken care of. And it does require participation in the NFIP as a condition for most types of federal disaster assistance. So this required a big expansion. This is also when more communities started joining in the early to late 70s. National Flood Insurance Reform Act of 1994, it strengthened the insurance requirements, particularly with the secondary mortgage market. It required that communities required that FEMA review the maps every 5 years. Doesn't mean they have to update them every 5 years, but they did need to do assessments to determine whether they're still valid or not, and if there was a prioritization for those remapping.
So to interrupt Steve a second, before that comes in, while we may not always come around and be ready to update your maps, but if you've had a CAV done, community assistance visit, or an audit, one of the 6 questions in that audit process is, are your, basically, for lack of a better word, are your maps doing what they say they will do? That make sense? If it shows a floodway, remember how Nate showed on the picture this morning, if you were in his presentation, that, or Angie, whichever one of them was driving across the bridge, and they said it did what it said it do. So in FEMA's eyes, we or them can do a CAV. We are auditing that map. Is your map doing the right things? Then we get in and take those questions. You know, sometimes we'll write, yes it is, no it's not, here's what needs to be done, or we've done updates or whatever over that period of time. So that is being done, and I know in the West it may sound like, hey, our maps are a 2010 version in a lot of cases, but if you've had a CAV in the last 5 years or so, then that question has been asked. Go ahead, sir.
All right, thanks. This act also established the technical Mapping Advisory Council, or TMAC, at least the first one that ran from 1995 to 2000, and recommendations from that council related to the new, sort of the map modernization program that started in 2000 when North Carolina started its program for floodplain mapping. There's been a couple other TMACs since then, and they continue to meet in these time periods periodically to provide recommendations to FEMA on improving flood mapping in the country. This may or may not be on the exam, but Bigger Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012. This was a big deal because it removed grandfathering and eliminated a lot of subsidies. It required the NFIP to move to actuarial rates, but it could not increase more than 25% per year for non-primary residents. Or it did, it did. That was the maximum there. Any new policies would be actuarial upon sale. And it established a National Flood Insurance Reserve Fund to help pay claims and repay the debt that the program already owed to the United States Treasury. Well, some of the folks that helped develop what we call BW12, Bigger Waters Reform Act of 2012, mainly Miss Waters, decided that, because she was from Florida, by the way, constituents started getting these increases applied to their flood insurance, and they were not pleased because it went up, and it went up fast. So to try to slow that down a little bit, 2 years later, Congress passed the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act. Still some questionable about what means affordability, but in 2014, they repealed many of the premium increases, or at least limited them from the previous legislation. They imposed a surcharge on occupancy and primary residence status. So it's $25 for primary residence and $250 for every other policy, whether it's non-residential or secondary homes. And that's applied to every policy. So it's a fee, not an increase in the rate. So they kind of pulled some pieces out, and they apply all these surcharges and fees after the initial rate has been established. They did cap the annual increases for flood insurance premiums to 18% per year. And again, that's just the premiums for coverage on the building and contents. It could be higher based on all these other fees and assessments at the end. And it also authorized the NFIP to secure reinsurance for the NFIP and be able to utilize the market like other insurance companies. So this kind of ended up leading to the risk rating 2.0 over time, but this is the last major legislation for the NFIP. And mostly what else we've had is continuing resolutions to keep the program going. So again, that surcharge and some of the other fees were not included in that 18% or 15% cap increase caps. It did say it's no longer actuarial upon sale. That has kind of gone away. It did reinstate grandfathering, so properties that were already paying at a certain rate could be put on a glide path to get to full risk rate. And it does, again, increases for non-primary or non-residential structures could go up faster, increased by 25%. And a big thing that it did do was increase the maximum deductible for residential properties from $5,000 to $10,000. Now, that's what the property owner has to pay out of pocket before the policy starts paying, but it does help reduce the cost if they increase that deductible. So it gives people more options of what they're able to do with their insurance policy, but it did provide, like, again, some flexibility, but there's also risk with that as well. North Carolina state law, which is not on the exam, North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter 143, and we won't get into this any more than this because you can look it up later, but those of you that are taking an exam, it's not gonna be on your CFM exam. This kind of breaks it down into sections.
So while Steve is while Steve's going through those slides, I get questions all the time, and it's not gonna be on the exam, but at the local level, many communities, when 160D came about, their attorneys, their counsel, whoever, authorized them to put in 160D.923. If you look at what needs to be in there, it's 160D, or excuse me, chapter 160D, chapters 7, 9, and 11. 7 is building, 9 is other related like agriculture, and 11 is zoning. I might have the zoning in the building, but that's what it is, okay? Also in 160D.105, that's where he mentioned this in the slide previous about the auto adoption piece. If you look in there, it also says in that section under Article 3, Section B, and any revisions here too. That's the auto adoption piece. So if you get an attorney or a consultant that's redoing your ordinance, they put that 160D.923 in that statutory authorization, back up, punt. Anytime you revise an ordinance, let me or your particular planner in my position know and see it and review it before you get it adopted. Otherwise, you could be going back and get it readopted, okay? That happens a lot anymore since Haleen, especially out here, a lot of the communities are wanting to up their freeboard and such.
Yep.
So please, if you decide to change your ordinance, because we have a copy on file that's registered with FEMA, then if you're making changes to your ordinance that you're going to enforce, that's part of your requirement for belonging to the NFIP, let us take a look at it before you get it approved, save you a lot of headache. All right, thank you, brother.
All right, some things that you might see on the exam that we don't cover a lot in our training because it's peripheral is Clean Water Act from 1972. And some of you at the local level deal with this probably on a day-to-day basis, but again, it may not be in your mind to think about it in floodplain management. So Section 401 deals with state certification and state water quality standards, which is what NCDEQ deals with. Section 402, NPDES, permits for non-point sources of pollution and eliminating some of those or reducing that. That's mostly held with the EPA. Section 404 deals with dredge and fill permits, both in streams and wetland areas. That is U.S. Army Corps of Engineers manages those or issues permits for that. Also, there's the Endangered Species Act. Section 7 requires consultation with the services, whether it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or National Marine Fisheries Services, for federal action. So if the federal agency is issuing a permit, giving you money, or doing some active construction project themselves, they are required by the law to consult with the services to make sure that they're not going to impact endangered species. Sections 9 and 10 deal with permits, violations, and enforcement for other development that are not federal projects. So private development and those sort of things, that's where you can get in trouble if you, kill or harass an endangered species or dig up an endangered plant or something like that. Now we'll get into the regulations. I like going to ecfr.gov. Makes it easy. You can copy and paste it. You can cite it and copy the links. So if you need to send it to somebody, you can show them directly. This describes the program, the National Flood Insurance Program, and sets up that regulatory framework. We don't need to necessarily talk about that. That's for more training. So I do want to point out the difference between statutory and regulatory. So statutory deals with the law that's passed, and regulatory deals with the regulations that are based on the law. And so we'll have like the law, like National Flood Insurance Act, and then the agency that's being tapped to create the framework or regulations for that will go through the process of having it put into the Code of Federal Regulations and go through that public comment process. Communities must adopt and enforce ordinances that meet or exceed these minimum requirements. Again, they're minimums. They're designed to ensure that new buildings will be protected from the flood levels shown in the flood insurance study. That's important to know. That flood insurance study provides information from a snapshot in time. Things do change over time, and that's why we encourage higher standards, is to account for some of that variability that we might see over time. And the hope is that over time, some of our pre-firm buildings, the older ones, will be replaced with post-firm structures and be less exposed to those flood hazards. Or if we have like a substantial improvement or substantial damage, they will be brought into compliance to reduce future losses. These regulations describe the program, the terms of use to run the program, minimum criteria for floodplain management, technical criteria and requirements for revising or amending the maps, and it does codify fees charged for reviewing map change requests. When we talk about the regulations, we usually just use 44 CFR 65.5. You can also say Title 44, Part 65, Section 5. So parts, sections, paragraphs, subparagraphs. Again, I don't know if you'll really see this on the exam, just giving you some information. Again, 59 through 77 or 79 deal with floodplain management. Part 59 is the general provisions. It describes the program and provides definitions. So all the definitions in your ordinance come from 59.1. Part 60 deals with criteria for land use and management. It's where are the basis of our floodplain management ordinances. 60.3 is really where the rubber hits the road. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Part 61 talks about insurance coverage and rates. And Part 62 deals with the sale of insurance and adjustment of claims. Part 63, implementation of Section 1306, which is demolition or relocation of insured structures subject to imminent collapse. That's been rescinded, but it may come back. Part 64, communities eligible for the sale of insurance. So it does list, and you usually have to go somewhere else to get the list, but it does recognize those communities in the country that are participating in the program. Part 65 deals with identification and mapping of special flood hazard areas. Also deals with map revisions, conditional letters of map revision, letters of map revisions, CLOMARs and LOMARs, LOMARs Fs, and other changes. Also requirements for map changes dealing with the floodways and levee systems. Part 67, it deals with the appeals of proposed flood elevation determinations. So when we're going through the map process and we have that 90-day appeal period, this is the part of the regulations that requires that appeal and comment period for jurisdictions in the public to make comments on those determinations. Part 68 deals with administrative hearing process. This is dealing with the maps and when those appeals to the maps cannot be resolved. Part 70, procedure for map correction. This establishes the LOMA, letter of map amendment. And again, provides that administrative procedure for the review of scientific or technical data that the owner has been inadvertently included in the special flood hazard area. Part 71, implementation of coastal barrier legislation. Structures that were constructed in a coastal barrier resource area or otherwise protected area after its designation date is not eligible for NFIP flood insurance or disaster assistance. Really, any federal financial assistance is denied to that structure. If they were built prior to the designation date, they're grandfathered in until they're substantially improved or substantially damaged. Part 72, procedures and fees for processing map changes. So things that are being done under Part 70 and Part 65, FEMA can recoup the cost of reviewing those. And it also provides conditions where it's fee exempt. So for example, letter of map amendment, there is no fee to the submitter or requester. So that's covered under Part 72. Part 73, implementation of Section 1316 of the Flood Insurance Act. This is denial of flood insurance coverage for buildings in violation. So once a community has exhausted its violation process and still cannot get that building to be brought into compliance for whatever reason, the community can request to FEMA that the structure be placed on the Section 1316 designation, which then continues to show a violation for that structure, and it's not eligible for flood insurance or other disaster assistance until it's brought into compliance. So this is sort of the last stick in the toolkit for bringing compliance. Once the building is brought into compliance, we can notify FEMA and its benefits can be restored to that structure. So it's not permanent, but it does remain in place until the building's brought into compliance.
If you're going to seek 1316, make sure all of your previous bases coming up to that have been covered, and make sure all of your documentation and paperwork is in order and in place. That will be very valuable in you getting that 1316 on that property.
There is no Part 74, it's reserved right now. Part 675 provides exemption for state-owned properties under self-insurance plans. So where states do self-insurance, they're not required to maintain flood insurance on those structures for state-owned buildings. So things like our universities, at the UNC system, state government buildings, etc. North Carolina and 12 other states have self-insurance plans, so we fall under this exemption. Part 77 deals with flood mitigation grants, again, FMA program, and the requirements for that program. Then there's several others after that, including Part 80 that deals more with the mitigation program. Again, 60.3 is where most of the floodplain management criteria apply for typical flood areas, riverine and coastal. And it's layered, so as you increase in the sections or subsections, you add additional data and levels of requirements. So 60.3A are requirements for communities that join the program but don't have any mapped special flood hazard areas. They're typically required to permit all development in their community until some sort of flood hazard is identified. Once you hit B, we establish special flood hazard areas, but we don't have base flood elevations, just A zones. So there's a set of requirements for those areas. Then we increase to C, where we have our base flood elevations, but no floodways on our mapped areas. There are a lot of rules in that one. And again, they continue to build. So the requirements for D, once we have a floodway established and base flood elevations, it'll say everything in C and B, with one exception, are required. And then E, we have coastal high hazard areas or V zones. So that's where we're starting to get into other areas. Now F, we don't use in North Carolina because it deals more with flood control systems, but that's in special cases. And then there's a whole set of regulations for different types of flood hazards as well. You want to take over here?
what is a special flood hazard area? Y'all tell me. Say it again.
Floodway and 100 years.
Okay, it could include a floodway and a 100-year. Come on, Ann.
1% annual chance of flooding.
Okay, so the special flood hazard, or let's back up just a minute. Let's define the special flood hazard area to start with, and then we'll figure out what y'all said has been zoned so far. What is a special flood hazard area? It's the area set aside that's susceptible to flooding can occur, right? Now, what kind of zones do we have?
1% annual
A
chance.
1% annual chance, or the AE zone, commonly referred to as the 100-year floodplain, or the 500-year is not regulated, but it's what? 0.2% chance. And then what's the floodway? The most dangerous part of the whole deal is represented on the Frizz site by how? Blue and white hash marks. Then what if you see just the white without the blue on it? You got 100-year and you got a white mark. What's that mean? Non-encroachment area. We've talked about that. Most of you understand. So if it doesn't have the white, and that's the delineation, so the blue and white is the floodway. When we talk about the non-encroachment area in North Carolina, does anybody not know what the non-encroachment area is? Or never heard that term? Okay, good. Historically, it's been regulated or shown on the map as that yellow line in the center. Give you a picture, and you went to the table and looked up. So as we move along and get each of your community's new maps, we're making that the white piece, so you can readily see it. Instead of having to go to that table, you can just flip up your little ruler and measure it. So we've got special flood hazard area is that land set aside that's susceptible to flooding at any given time. The AE 100-year is that 1% annual chance flooding can occur. The 500-year or the X zone is that 0.2% chance. The floodway is the most dangerous, represented on the Frizz map. You won't see that on the FEMA map. Y'all will see your paper FEMA map online tomorrow, but look at your legend. You will look at, remember the old white paper maps that you should have in your office? Everybody should be shaking their head like I'm telling you. Yeah, if you ain't, you've got a violation here. That's paperwork kept in perpetuity. You say, why do I got to keep them old maps? Why do I have to keep those old maps? You've got a house in Boone or Watauga County that's built before you had maps? Absolutely. You've got a flood insurance study that goes with them maps. You keep that stuff in perpetuity. Look at the legend of your map. It will show you what little color or dots represent the floodway. Everybody with me? So use what resources you have tomorrow, folks. They'll show you a picture of a map and they'll show you the legend. So we'll get more into that in a little bit. Wrong way. All right, Steve. So, the flood is defined by the NFIP as a temporary condition of partial or completely inundation of normally dry land areas from overflow of inland or tidal waterways or unusual or rapid accumulation or runoff of surface water. Any area that flooding can occur, I promise you you'll just about see that tomorrow, okay? That's what you need to put in your pocket. Any area susceptible to inundation by the water source. You saw on Nate's slides, if you were in his class this morning, it inundated. That's where the French Broad or whatever the body of water it was did that. The base flood, we mentioned it there a minute ago. It's that flooding, that 1% of being equaled or exceeded in any given year. The AE zone is a 100-year floodplain. It's that 1% annual chance flooding can occur. Hey, that's one of them Mickey D's by the boat, by the water trough, right? You ride right in your boat and get you a Big Mac. See, y'all needed to laugh. I knew you were getting down in the dungeon here. You need to laugh a minute. So, the special flood hazard area is a shaded area on the digital firm flood insurance rate map, which identifies the area that has the 1% or greater chance of being flooded in any given year. Then the digital firm also identifies those other areas. A, AO, AH, AE, A99, or numbered A zones, B and BE. What's the AO?
Sheet flow.
Shallow flooding. Usually, what does your ordinance say? Towards the back of your ordinance in Article 5, it talks about or maybe in Article, right before Article 6. It talks about different zones. AO, shallow flooding. What's AH?
Ponding.
Ponding. What's AE again?
Elevations.
1%, 100 year, whatever you wanna call it. What's A99 or numbered A zones?
There's some definitions coming up next.
Okay.
Go with this.
And then the V zones, what did Steve tell you a minute ago? Coastal, and then the VE zone. How many coastal folks have I got in here? Anybody? One? Okay. Welcome to the western part of the state. We come to see y'all when it's hot. Now y'all coming up here, we're gonna freeze to death. Here we go. I'll let y'all read them.
One thing to point out with AH and AO, both are shallow flooding. AH deals with ponding. You can think of H as a hole. You have a hole that fills up with water, ponding. The depths are, in both cases, are between 1 and 3 feet. For AH, we provide a whole foot base flood elevation on the map. AO, shallow flooding, which is usually sheet flow or overland, you might think of that. Again, 1 to 3 feet, but we're providing the depth 1, 2, or 3 feet above the grade rather than an elevation. So that's the difference between those two zones. Slightly different type of flooding, and then what you see on the map is different.
Before I forget, is anybody in here from the city of Gastonia? If you see Bill, ask him if he's got a Brent or Brian from the city of Gastonia on his list. He's supposed to be coming, that was Keith that called him out ago. That he's supposed to be coming up here. I said, did he register? He said yes. So we need to make sure he's on Bill's list, save him a trip if he ain't, or work that out before he leaves Gastonia. Okay, here's some more designations. AR. Huh?
Ryan Roberts.
Maybe. It's from the city of Gastonia?
It doesn't tell me where they're
Okay.
from. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's either Brian or Brent. The AR, special flood hazard areas that result from decertification of previously accredited flood protection systems that is in the process of being restored to provide the 1% annual chance for greater level of flood protection. After it's restored, these areas will still experience residual flooding from other flooding sources. There he is. A99, special flood hazard areas inundated by 1% annual chance to be protected from 1% annual chance. V zones is the inundation by 1% annual chance of flooding the coastal floods with velocity hazards. And then VE is the wave action that's added to it. The X zone, or the 0.2% chance, non-regulated, primarily there for planning purposes. That's the unshaded, and the X shaded zone is a 0.2. Areas are subject to 1% annual chance with depths of less than 1 foot, with contributing drainage areas less than a square mile and protected by levees from base flood. Then zone X for future is the future base flood, that are there for planning purposes. And zone Z or D rather, areas in which the flood hazards are undetermined. If I was a betting man, I'd say you would see AE, X, B, and VE tomorrow. I'd say you might see A99 or AO. Those are probably the primary ones. Floodway, the CFR is a channel of the river or other water course that's reserved in order to discharge the base flood without cumulatively increasing the water surface elevation more than a designated height. Then it's the portion of the floodplain that must be kept free of encroachment so the annual 1% chance flood discharge can be conveyed without increasing that 1% chance. And it's typically 1 foot in most states. Yes.
If you change your, per community, if you can change the rise to say half a foot and lower that, so it's a lower standard, does that only come into implementation in the map change when the FEMA can update the maps to accommodate the local?
You're talking about if you change your rise, or if you're talking about freeboard?
Yeah, instead of a 1 foot rise. You say
Not sure
you
I'm
can't
following.
allow a
Right,
rise
so
over
for the
half a
development
foot.
of the floodway, what we're talking about. Terry, go ahead and show the next section there, because this kind of explains it. So we got our floodplain, and then we add in these artificial encroachments in the model that creates this surcharge. Keep going. And there's the floodway in there, and that surcharge is that 1 foot difference. So there are some states that have lower thresholds. Mecklenburg County, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Stormwater Services, for their mapping, they have 2 floodways. They have a 1/2 foot surcharge and a 1/10 of a foot surcharge for their community encroachment area. And the FEMA floodway has a 1/2 foot surcharge. So they've just lowered this. What happens if you were going to lower this surcharge? What would happen with the floodway? What do you think would happen? You say? Wider. So yeah, see, when you squeeze this, you're just displacing the water that would normally be in the floodplain into this more narrow space. That creates the surcharge. So if you have a lower surcharge, you'll have a wider floodway. So more of the floodplain area will be subject to those other requirements. It can come all the way out. Some communities wouldn't allow any development in a special flood hazard area, but you know, that's their choice for higher standards. But those are things that need to be discussed with FEMA and us when we meet with you at the discovery phase, if you want to start implementing that, and or you can go through the LOMAR process or a PMR to change that for particular streams. But it is possible. It just you know, you have to make sure that you're able to manage that locally.
Good. 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 Get your question. You good with it?
Yep.
Okay. So the floodway plus the floodway fringes equals the floodplain surcharge should not exceed 1.0 foot. The base flood elevation is the water surface elevation associated with that 1% annual chance, may be rounded to the nearest whole foot on the flood insurance rate map. But on an elevation certificate, how's it got to be listed? There to the nearest 1/10 of a foot, yes. Types of flood maps. Flood hazard boundary maps, I think all those are gone in North Carolina, Steve. There might be none that I know of. They were delineates the special flood hazard area as Zone A and is usually only used in emergency phase of NFIP. So if you're a participating community, that's long gone. The floodway boundary, or excuse me, the flood boundary and the floodway map. It's regular phase use, it's supplemental to the firm, and it shows the floodway data. Then you have what we know as the firm, the flood insurance rate map. It's used in the regular phase, and if you're participating, you're in the regular phase. Shows the floodplains, the BFEs were available, the profile data, etc. And if your newer firms are combining all data into one map, and some are even going county or statewide. We're very fortunate, as has been said a number of times in North Carolina, to have gone from that white paper map. They took that and they digitized it and put it into our first ncfloods.com or whatever it was back then, and then they have now gone and done more like you guys are commonly used to for GIS type work. It has layers and rastering and stacked it all up in, you know, all that stuff's been done. First floor elevations were obtained, and now you have point-and-click BFE. And we had the floodway, the blue and white. We had the blue, which is the AE or 100 year. We had the yellow, which is the 500 year or X zone. And now, as my question earlier when I walked out to answer the phone was in regards to the non-encroachment area, it is being shown on most of your maps, if you haven't got anything updated lately, as a yellow line in the center of the stream. You go find the table and you see what at those cross sections, some interpolation may be necessary, but the newer maps, as you get new maps, that non-encroachment data is being shown the white. That's the white of that blue and white floodway stripe. And you just have to measure it. So that's kind of how the frizz, you're not going to see that on there tomorrow on the frizz site, but you can, again, look at the legend of your map. There may be the answer to your question as to what's representing what, okay? Again, our frizz symbology, what I just basically said, the yellow here refers to the shaded X. That zone AE is the blue. The floodway is this blue and white. And if we had a picture of a stream that was a limited detail study, it would have this color of blue with either the yellow line, and you can interpolate from the table, or it would have the white that is represented in this white here. That's the width of the non-encroachment area.
It's the same thing on FEMA's.
Yep, that's what you'll see on the National Flood Hazard Layer. Here's our coastal. The zone AE or coastal A zone looks like this. The LMWA or limit of moderate wave action is the blue area. Oh, the black and white, black and white, I'm sorry. Aaron deals with the coastal, I deal with the mountains. Then this is the green represents the BD zone. Okay. Young lady, are you the only coastal resident? Are you good with that? You good with it? You good with it? Okay. Hey, giving everybody their chance. This is what the National Flood Hazard Layer map looks like.
Yeah, so on the CFM exam, whether they talk about the limel or not, it's depicted as a black line with the triangles pointing towards the seaward direction. Just keep that in mind. The symbology on FRIZ is different than the FEMA guidelines and standards for printed maps.
Your flood insurance study, your FIZ, we got acronyms out the yin yang, right? Tell me about this flood insurance study before I flip the slide. Tell me what you know about the flood insurance study. First off, do you have one in your office? What does it look like? Ooh. I need to do some more calves. Come on, Whitney, talk to me.
Document like that big?
So document about that thick, maybe in one or more volumes.
Right.
Okay, is it hardbound or paperback? But it's paperback, stapled together.
Yep.
Got old school printing technology on it. So what's inside from, yeah, like that, one of them kind of staplers. What's inside this document about that thick that may be in more than one volume and has old school printing technology? What's inside of it? Huh? Historical flood information? Floodway data? Flood profiles? How the methodology was determined when the map Steve talked about discovery. So we didn't just come out and say, voila, you're going to get the 100 year, and voila, you're going to get the 500 year, and you're getting the floodway. There was some methodology put together, and I know it's not the old farmer that says, I've been here 110 years, and it's never flooded here. It's that 1% annual chance that it could occur, right? Trying to throw things back in your memory here that you're liable to see. It's called repetitive persistence. So that flood study has a wealth of knowledge in it. There's profiles you can pull out and look at certain areas. They may have more than one page for a certain stream or area. It has those little octagonal signs on those profiles. What are they called? Cross sections. Where you're going to find what goes with that number on that cross section. Somebody said we had profiles or floodway data. Yeah, it's in those tables inside that. So how are those tables listed? Alphabetically by stream. Some could be in a full detail study listing, some could be in a limited detail study. So that book has a wealth of knowledge in it. And so, okay, we get new maps coming up in 2026. I can trash all the old ones, right or wrong? Wrong. Keep it in perpetuity, because her house was built in 1929, and she's done these before we had maps called pre-firm, right? Your house was built in 2024, so you're after the fact. So that flood insurance study relates to the particular set of maps that it was done for. And when you get the new maps next year, or whichever year it is, you will get a new flood study. So when you adopt those maps, you're adopting not only the map itself, but the flood insurance study that goes along with it. Background, authority, scope, principal flood problems, where flooding has occurred. That's why we're doing discovery. We're discovering what your community thinks you need, or based on where your future planning is. Everybody's growing. You know, it's been mentioned a number of times across the hall, everybody's building. Hey, I wanna build a hospital, a record storage, a police station, a school. What's this gonna do? So I may need to update. That's the information that you would tell Steve, Stacy, me, whoever comes out, and it'll definitely be Stacy and her new counterpart when Steve gets them hired. When we do that discovery information, we're trying to find out what your community needs. You know, what's the existing and proposed flood control projects? What's engineering methods are used? Floodplain management and or insurance applications. That floodway data table, as my friend in the middle said here, provides data from hydraulic modeling. So we make a model of how this is supposed to happen. You know, historically, it doesn't always work like that, but historically they're fairly accurate. We identify cross-section ID or information, the start of where the model is, the floodway width, the section area, the velocity, and so forth, and it's included in most FIS reports. This is what one of the tables look like. This one happens to be in a full detailed study. This happens to be Allen Creek, Haywood County. Here's your floodway information. Here's your BFE, your surface water elevation. Notice the datum that was used. Gary talked about that yesterday a little bit. As we go forward, we're going to get the new data would be included on whatever is coming out later. Go ahead, sir. I'm gonna grab me a drink of water.
A couple things right here you to be aware of when you're working on your exam or any case. Your main focus is going to be on this regulatory column for floodplain management purposes. We also provide water source elevations for that base flood, both without and with the floodway. Most cases, the without floodway and the regulatory are going to match. There are some cases where the regulatory will be higher than the without floodway because there's some flooding effects by a larger tributary or river that impacts the BFE. The difference between the with and without floodway is this increase, and the increase is what? The surcharge for the floodway. So you can see here that you probably can't see in the back, but they range from 0.0 to 0.7. So they have to be between 0.0 and 1.0 for any particular stream to meet the requirements. If you have a higher standard and only have that half foot, you would only see up to half a foot of surcharge in those areas, or the increase. So that's how this table is set up. Maybe help you kind of relate it to that other diagram Terry shared earlier.
So the profile depiction of the stream invert elevations, the cross-section locations, and the flood elevations along the stream. It's the hydraulic structure used in the hydraulic modeling analysis. It shows the extent of the modeling, and it's used to determine the intermediate exact BFEs between the cross sections. Here's like a profile that you would pull out of your thing. This one's in Brunswick County on Lockwood Folly River. You may see one of these tomorrow in your packet or on the test. And it would ask you certain things, and the little octagons that I spoke about, those are what again? Cross sections. Remember I told you about your map legend? So this particular profile legend is there. Let me back up one. We'll get to a map here in a minute, hopefully. And then this is the 500 year over here, the 100 year or the 1% annual chance, and here's the 2% annual chance. Here's the 10%. Shows a bridge. Okay, questions so far?
Is there any way you can make it any bigger on that screen?
Unfortunately, no. All right, so map update methods are FEMA funded to study or restudy. Then there's physical map revisions, the community property owner initiated amendments and revisions. Those are the letters of map change. Scott Gentry is our low map manager. letter of map amendment. Then there's a letter of map of revision based on field. I had one of those calls this morning. And then there's a letter of map revision besides the field. And then the physical, the PMRs, as Steve mentioned earlier. The Lomar F don't have to go through Scott, the rest of them do, right, Steve?
Yeah, LOMAs and LOMAR-Fs are dealt with FEMA's contractor level for our state. LOMARs and CLOMARs go through our state letters of map revision review process, and we have a staff engineer that manages that program.
You see Stacy running around here, she works extensively with the map updates. If you see letters coming out about different meetings, CCO meetings or whatever, Stacy's most likely the one that's working with that piece. If you're starting to get new maps or have public meetings, as we've got several scheduled out here at the end of this month and then in October, then I know we're coming to Watauga and everywhere else too. So Stacy and me, I try to go with her when I can, but Stacy and me will be the ones that are out here. So it is what it is. If you need assistance, Steve, myself, or again, if it's primarily dealing with the LOMAX, the letters of map change, Scott Gentry is our LOMAC manager and is very knowledgeable and expertise in his email is scott.gentry@ncdps.gov, just like ours is. Some flood insurance basics. Who writes the flood insurance? State licensed insurance agents. They can write property and casualty policies. They're in good standing with the licensing department. They must meet mandatory training requirements and to write your own NFIP directly. Or there's referral agents, the localities at NC Floods or www.floodsmart.gov. There's the number. So there is a movement, I guess, to privatize flood insurance. I don't think you'll see that on the exam yet, but that's just for an example. That is out there. One thing I'll back up 2 slides. In the map update methods, if you're the floodplain administrator for your community, your responsibilities under the duties that you participate in the map updates. Okay? General rules for writing NFIP policies. There's the flood insurance manual that was put out in April, then the flood insurance manual that was coming out this year. It provides that general rules for writing flood insurance. It's available at FEMA.gov. Write your own, or you can get it NFIP direct. The subsidized FEMA flood insurance is not competitive, meaning that I can't, if you come to me, Ann comes to me and says, I want to get flood insurance for my property, my home, and my contents. I give her a price. She goes over and sees my comrade over here, and he says, oh, I'll beat that price. Is that legal? No. Not competitive. FEMA sets the rates. The limits of coverage, and I probably told some of you wrong, I wasn't aware this had gone up, but it has gone up. It's up to $250,000 for, back up, it's the wrong button. $250,000 for all of you guys are in the regular program, as far as I know. All 100 counties, 607 of the 624 towns are participating in the regular phase. So if you have a NFIP policy, you can get up for a single family resident, you can get up to $250,000 in building and up to $100,000 in contents. That was up from $30,000. For non-residential, there's 500 and 500 here. Then the contents has gone to 500 as well. Go ahead, Steve.
Just for the CFM exam, even though we don't have any emergency program communities, you may see this on the exam, so just keep that in mind. It is a much lower amount than the regular program coverage. Okay, go ahead, Terry.
And that would be, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be if you're just in the regular phase, or the emergency phase before you get totally joined to the regular phase.
Right, so emergency program historically was if there was, say, an event like Helene happened, but the community didn't have a flood map, FEMA might establish an emergency program application for the community to join, but without knowing what the hazards are, they can't provide that full coverage, so they would allow some lesser extents of insurance to be sold until they can map the community and get the community back into the full regular program. Go ahead, Terry.
The mandatory purchase requirement applies to properties in the special flood hazard area. Insurance is a prerequisite to receive a federally regulated loan by the insured lenders. So we, the state, don't make your citizens buy flood insurance. I hear that all the time. No. Actually, you, the community, don't make them buy flood insurance. You agreed to adopt and enforce to allow them to get subsidized flood insurance. Their lending institution is the one that's requiring that. The insurance is a prerequisite. We talked about that. The requirement is triggered when a loan is made, increased, renewed, or extended. In the flood fact, a structure in the SFHA has a minimum 26% chance of flood loss over a 30-year period. Then the insurance must be in effect for the life of the loan. We see this a lot of times, and I could go into the program and look, and I'll see you got, let's just say you got 300 flood insurance policies, and I can break them out into zones. Then whenever I can tell by looking at the numbers when you pay that loan, or when people pay that loan off, it changes the way it's no longer mandatory. You can choose to keep it, which is, as Nate said this morning, buy flood insurance, buy flood insurance, buy flood insurance. Not a matter of if it floods, it's a matter of when it floods again. Here's the insurance claims handbook. It is designed to assist NFIP claims professionals in guiding policyholders through the claims process. The handbook is designed to help policyholders prepare for and recover from a flood event. If you were out here in the west, there was still a JFO opened in Asheville. It was open in Hickory, and they're all kind of specialists in that joint field office that's out helping the communities. There are floodplain managers, there are mitigation people, there are insurance specialists. So if you need that kind of help after an event in your community, it doesn't have to be a Helene. You could have 5 hours of rain in Watauga County and you have flooding up there, Whitney. So if you need some help, let us know. We'll make some phone calls and say we can't get you some help up there. It's happened in Caldwell, in the Coxville area, that I know of several times over the course of time when it wasn't tied to a Helene or a Floyd or anything like that. It was just a 4, 6, 8 hour rain event.
Question.
Yes, sir.
So, except for determining substantial repair, the floodplain administrator isn't directly involved in the claims process. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
The insurance adjuster deals with that.
And I know I've had calls from, I don't think anybody in this room, it may have been Whitney or Ann, but I know there's some other communities have called me and said, hey Terry, can you help us out here? That insurance adjuster that you mentioned has gone out and there's a disagreement, or they don't want to pay. So that's where we've tried to come in and get a hold of our FEMA contacts that are in that JFO and say, hey, can you walk through this? Because understand, those people are coming from everywhere. Remember what Nate said this morning, and Angie said there's something to be about compassion. We've got to work, because we got to live here. We got to work with our citizens, okay? So if that happens, and it's happened on a number of occasions to me, there might there's a gentleman here who called me and said, hey, I had this loss during Helene. They said, no, can you help out? So we made a phone call, we sent somebody else by, and they approved some parts and pieces of it and got it resolved. So, if that happens, just give us a call. Prefer if you, the floodplain administrator, call us rather than your homeowners, because we work better with y'all than we do the homeowners. I'll let y'all deal with that, okay? All right, so hazard mitigation grants, let's see where it goes here, and I may hand it to Steve and run. So this has been talked about several times already this morning. What is mitigation?
Making something more resilient.
So it don't necessarily happen the same way again, right? Yes. So there's after events, you will see, and it's not immediate. After events, you will see all of these grants start opening up, and then we have to get to A, B, C, D, E, F, and G before H will open up. Okay, so the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, HMGP, you're likely to see that on your exam. What is it? It's a program that help me out, Steve, monies come from after a declared disaster, that there's monies available to help you do things to mitigate your property or what have you, so it doesn't occur, you know, it doesn't occur as bad, or it doesn't affect it. One of the things that I know is probably the cheapest, easiest way to increase your efficiency is raise your utilities. Raise HVAC systems, because we see that in abundance of your floods and your stuff's on the ground or really low to the ground, gets flooded. Can we elevate that? So HMGP money could potentially be used, and there's a whole HMGP department within our shop, then they're also within FEMA's shop.
The most important thing about HMGP and some of these others is that they're post-disaster. So after an event, the money is provided in a lot of cases for these different programs, but there has to be a federally declared disaster. And then there's also non-disaster category of grants that are offered on an annual competitive basis.
Right.
And Terry, you want to talk about those?
So your local emergency manager is your ticket to ride when it comes to talking about HMGP and some of these other grants that are out there, okay? You potentially will hear about them or know about them being opened up, especially after a disaster, as a floodplain manager, but get to know your EM coordinator in your respective community. You know, that's gonna be most often gonna be the county emergency manager. So the middle one here, hazard mitigation grant post-fire, HMGP-PM. Do what?
Do it next one.
Okay.
Gonna help you out.
Okay, so somebody, let me back up. The 75% cost share and 25% non-federal cost share. And there's some documentation out there will help you decide what that 25% non-federal cost share, which largely comes from you, what you can do, whether it's in kind, you know, administrative type stuff or whatever, wherever you pull that money from. So it was mentioned over in the sessions, I think yesterday or maybe this morning, that we're here in a flood conference, we're talking about wildfires. What happened about a month after, well, a little bit more than a month, but after Hurricane Helene hit and was gone? What happened out here in the western part of the state? Matter of fact, we're sitting in Swain County right now on the reservation. We're sitting here, and there were some pretty nasty fires back in that southwest corner of Swain County. So it's all that downfall, that debris. We had dozers in there working, you know, and there was all, and you mentioned downfall in his presentation this morning. So there's going to be, doesn't take but a spark to create a forest fire, especially when it gets dry. So those monies are there, just be aware of that. The flood mitigation assistance for swift current requires federal declaration, and it requires you to have a flood insurance policy. So some things that would behoove you, this has nothing to do with the test, but from a helpful standpoint, it would behoove you if you have, many of you are great with spreadsheets or databases in your own shop that says, okay, Ann has a house and I've made contact with her and she has flood insurance. Now, anytime you build that database or spreadsheet or whatever, it needs to be updated periodically, but whenever the disaster people start asking questions, especially doing that substantial damage, do they have flood insurance? It's a check block that you already know that. So things that might help you down the road as floodplain managers. Non-disaster assistance, the FMA requires a flood insurance policy. It's focused on repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss properties. Repetitive loss means what? Multiple, and then what's severe repetitive loss? Do what? It's bad. Okay. Then the LOOS? Huh? You think I'd catch that, dude? I didn't catch it to start with. We ride one another about. That's how we have our fun. Okay. The BRIC program or BRIC process, building resilient infrastructure in communities, is direct technical assistance. That was let and in operation, probably still is. The pre-disaster mitigation or PDM grant program, congressionally directed spending. I think that was in place for Helene as well.
Some of it was. Go back just one real quick, and then we'll get ready to take a break. So again, on the exam, BRIC may be too new, and they may not have incorporated that. But again, just know that there's non-disaster grants. FMA has been around for a long time, so that's primary. Again, flood insurance policies required. Pre-disaster mitigation grant program, covered a lot of different things. It used to be, you know, brick sort of replaced that initially, but there's some convoluted stuff going on with that too. But there were some competitive, not post-disaster mitigation grants available nationwide for communities to do any number of mitigation activities within their community. And it wasn't just for residential structures. They could, but it all had to be cost effective and that sort of thing. So before we get into knowledge check, it's about 3 o'clock. I think this is our break time, so we'll take our break. There will be some refreshments out there, hopefully, in the open room for you. Yes.
Okay, so on the knowledge check, there was one question about the elevation certificate and talking about like the sections, and it was like, oh, whose signature needs to be in this section? I guess my question is, what other types of sections and like, what other things do I need to know about that elevation certificate other than the one question?
You need to know everything about the elevation.
Right, and so that's where I'm trying to figure out what else I need to know.
So this is the current version I'm pulling up now. It may be slightly different than the one they show you on the, oh God, what are you looking at? They don't have that right. They don't have that right. It's okay, I'll work around it. Let's go back a couple years. It'll be fine. See if this works. All right, this is an older version, but it'll do for this conversation. First of all, and I know it's probably hard to see, I'm trying to zoom in a little bit. How far is this gonna go? Section A is required for all cases, right? And it's the building information. So provides the building owner's contact information, the property address, location, its latitude and longitude, its primary purpose or use, the building diagram number. Those are important to know. And there's the diagrams and the instructions. The enclosure, so if you have a crawl space or a basement, and then if there's an attached garage and what its dimensions are, square footage, and that's really for flood openings when we get to that point. Section B is your flood insurance rate map information, community name and its community ID number. So every community has a 6-digit community identification number. The first 2 digits use the state FIPS code. So every number in North Carolina will start with 37, but you might see different ones for other states. You should. I mean, you shouldn't be in Hawaii with 37. You're not in the right area. And then it's got its own 4-digit unique identifier. Your map panel number and its suffix. This is your firm panel and suffix. What's the firm index? Anybody know what that is? Anybody seen one?
It's an overall map that shows each of the firm panels that's included in that community or that county.
Right, that's correct. So we'll have like our county or community map, shows the whole jurisdiction, or like in North Carolina we do county-wide, so all of Guilford County, and then you can find Greensboro and all the communities there, but it has every panel listed and gridded out over that county boundary. And it has its own index date in the lower right-hand corner, just like the firm panel maps. You will never have a firm index date that is older than your firm panel date. So there are cases where some panels are updated and not all are. So if your firm index date is 2022, you will not have a firm panel number that's older than 2022. And if your firm index panel is 2022 and you think your index date is 2018, it's wrong. You can't have, this one cannot be any less current than the firm panel itself. They can be the same, but they can't be, the firm index date has to be more recent or the same as the firm panel. Then we have our zones and elevations. And then it's going to ask you what your source of the BFE is. For riverine, it's going to be the profile or fizz. Coastal is probably going to be firm. There are some cases where you might have community determined or other sources, like a letter of map revision. Then you're going to look at your vertical datum for elevations. FEMA pretty much adopted NAV 88 around 2000 and have used that for any new map updates. Everything prior to that was in NGVD 29. All of your indexes, profiles or in maps should have the vertical datum noted on those different documents. And then this asks about the Coastal Barrier Resource System. Then we have different sections. If you have base flood elevations, typically you're going to have section C completed. Construction drawings, building under construction or finished construction, everything finished construction, EC is required for everything in special flood hazard area. And then it goes through the different portions of the structure. Top and the bottom floor. This would include your crawl space or basement floor, or whatever is the lowest enclosure. Top and next higher floor if there is one. For coastal areas and some communities outside coastal areas like Macon County, bottom of lowest horizontal structural member is required. The reason for this in the V zone is we want to make sure that wave and all that water can pass under the supporting structure of the building, so it doesn't get washed away or destroyed by that wave action. Top of the slab of the attached garage, if there is one. Now, any of these cases where we don't have these things, we can put NA here. Again, this lowest horizontal structural member is really for coastal high hazard areas. But again, I know of at least one community in the western part of the state that does use that as their reference level. E is lowest elevation of equipment, machinery or equipment servicing the structure. You must describe the type of the equipment and its location in the comments section in D. Then we have our lowest adjacent grade, highest adjacent grade. These are directly at the edge of the wall of the structure. So where it touches the ground or a patio, sidewalk, whatever, wherever it's the lowest and highest grades. And then we have H, which is lowest adjacent grade at the lowest elevation of decks or stairs. So if something sticks out beyond that, goes farther down the hill, we want to make sure we have that lowest support. F and H may be the same, but typically this one is often lower in some cases, not all. These lowest adjacent grades, if you use your elevation certificate for a LOMA or LOMA or F application, they look at both of those values compared to the base flood elevation. Section D is where the surveyor will certify the elevation certificate and add comments. Now, in North Carolina, with our rules, typically if they're doing field survey, we want to have a professional land surveyor certify that. For FEMA, the national program, they do allow architects, engineers, or surveyors to certify this document, and it's dependent on whatever the state rules are for that particular profession or activity. Other sections, Section E. So if we don't have base flood elevations, we don't do C and D. We still do A and B, but then we do E and F instead. This does not require a licensed professional. It just requires that you know how to use a tape measure and that you can reasonably guess what the highest and lowest adjacent grades are of a building. So you're going to look at those different variables, referencing either is it above or below highest adjacent grade and lowest adjacent grade. And again, everything's shown either in feet or meters. Puerto Rico is the only territory in the United States that uses the metric system, so this only applies, meters only applies to Puerto Rico. Section F is the property owner or their representatives certification. Now G on this version is optional. On the current version it says recommended. This gives the, basically allows the community to summarize information for their permitting process and pulls data from other sections of the elevation certificate, again, to summarize it on one sheet and keep it handy for their information. And then it also has a signature, the new one has a signature, yeah, there it is, signature and notes. Building photographs are required, at least one of the front and the back. I'd like to see more. All the instructions are very helpful. Sorry to scroll, not making anybody sick. This guide is handy. This is sort of the C2A, top and bottom floor, C2C, lowest horizontal structural member. So that shows different examples with different types of foundations: slab, basement, piles, piers, or columns. Then we'll get into the building diagrams. So building diagrams 1A and B deal with slab on grade or slabs. This one's typical slab on grade, it's at grade. The 1B is an elevated slab structure, so this is all filled in, this is solid, doesn't have any enclosure opening in it. (2A) and (2B) deal with basements. Under the NFIP, how is a basement defined? Say it again.
All four sides below grade.
Okay, yep, so all sides below grade. So everything has to be below the grade of the adjacent to the structure itself. So walkout basement, we'll show in another example, is not considered a basement under the NFIP, it's just an enclosure. This is a situation where your egress to the building is below grade. You come out to some sort of, area here and then have to go up to the adjacent grade or higher grade with stairs or a ramp or something like that. Three and 4 deal with split level structures, where diagram 4 has a basement portion, again, subgrade on all sides. 5 and 6 are pile, pier, or post foundation types. 5 has no enclosures below. Everything's open except for those piles. 6 can be a partial or complete enclosure of the area below here. And then we've got 8, 7, and 8. So 7, this is that full story enclosure. Even though this part's below grade, this is not considered a basement in the NFIP. And then this is your standard crawl space. we'll talk about a couple rules real quick when we get to the next one. Diagram 9 is a subgrade crawl space. So if the top of the bottom floor is below grade on all sides, but, bless you, these are for cases where the difference between the top, the lowest adjacent grade and the top of the bottom floor, that difference cannot be more than 2 feet. Top of the bottom floor to the next higher floor, this space here cannot be more than 5 feet. Otherwise, it's considered a basement. Same thing with the crawl space. If the top of the bottom floor of the crawl space on 8 to the next higher floor is more than 5 feet, it's a diagram 7 full story enclosure, even if it's not completely like 8 feet or whatever. That answer all your questions? Do you still have specific questions on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to go over it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Yes, Ann.
I've always thought pre-firm really meant like specifically before the maps were
Mhm.
approved in our municipality, but I guess I saw somewhere along the line that it's either that effective date for the community's first flood insurance rate map or before December 31st, 1974.
That's correct.
Is it whichever is the earliest or
Whichever's the latest,
the latest?
date. So,
Oh, okay.
so that's a good point. Pre-firm is after December 31st, 1974 or January 1st, 1975 and beyond. Or the date of the community's initial firm. That you can find that date in the community status book. So if your initial firm date for your community is October 1st, 1980, that's after the 1974 date. So that determines your pre-firm, post-firm date. If your map was before that date for some reason, you would use the 1974 date. So if it was October 1st, 1973, it may very well have been, but not likely, then you would use December 31st, 1974 to determine pre or post-firm. And in most cases, the 70s maps were the flood hazard boundary maps that just showed the A-zone stippling, and some of those were converted later on by letter to firm panels. And some of the really old stuff we have, instead of FEMA printing a new map that said firm on it, they just sent you a sticker and you put it on the title block to say that it's now a firm as of this date. So they were creative back then. So that answer it?
Yes,
Good?
thank
Yep.
you.
Anything else?
Can you define repetitive loss? Like, is it over a certain amount of, what's the amount of years?
It's a tricky one. I don't like it. So repetitive loss is more than one, right? It's got to have at least 2 losses. And then severe repetitive loss has, like, I think it's 4 or more losses within a 10-year period. So there's a time period associated with that as well. And to make it even more confusing, which I won't get into with you, there's a NFIP, repetitive loss and severe repetitive loss, and then there's separate rules for FMA. So it's slightly different, but very similar definitions.
So when you say
Yes.
more than one ever, like since?
I mean, technically, yes. I mean, they track all of it from the initial, but I think there are some, like severe repetitive loss, and the repetitive loss for like insurance rating is on a 10-year sliding scale, but you know, generally speaking, repetitive loss is as it had more than one loss in the history of that structure. We can look it up real quick just to see if the interweb's working here again. Let's see what their website says. So this one's saying a 10-year period as well, so. So this is saying, 2 paid losses, more than $1,000 in each 10-year period since 1978 would be repetitive loss. Severe repetitive loss also has a caveat about if all the losses together exceed the value of the structure. What's this? This is a terrible definition. I don't know what they're getting. There's severe repetitive loss building or the contents. Why'd you give me that definition? That doesn't make any sense. Their
So if it's been more
websites.
than 10 years, does it reset?
It can for that piece of it. But again, I would,
Which would only really hurt their eligibility for programs to mitigate. It wouldn't really do anything other than that.
it impacts insurance now. It's part of the insurance calculation, but that won't be on the CFM exam. So, and I would look at the answers to questions about the NFIP. That's a good one.
That's the best book you'll ever put in your library. It's about this big and about yay big. It's answers to that question. What Steve just typed in there, you won't find a better book that you use. It's like, for lack of a better word, it's like frequently asked questions. Okay, it's got good stuff in it. There you go. I don't have any in my car.
This also has a lot of definitions in it, or it used to, so it's helpful to. Alright, here we go. Severe repetitive loss. Let me scroll down a little bit. So, I notice you can read that, right? If you zoom in a little bit.
Go over there to the top right and make it bigger. Or you can other work too.
So 4 or more separate claims each claim exceeding $5,000, or 2 separate claims where I think you've exceeded the market value of the structure. And this does not have the 10-year. It says in both instances at least 2 claims must be within 10 years of each other. And claims made within 10 days of each other are counted as one. And we got rep loss up here. We have repetitive loss here. So repetitive loss is 2 or more claims with $1,000. Same thing with the 10-year period. Next question. Anyone else? That answered Whitney, you good? Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
So just to follow up on that, the structure has to be insured by, it has to have NFIP insurance, but it doesn't have to be in the SFHA, right? Is that
For it to
correct?
be repetitive loss?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just has to have a policy.
It could be outside.
It could be,
Okay.
right, yeah. Anything else? Anybody have questions with? Everybody's good with using a profile and finding the BFE. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
If you have a disaster like Hurricane Helene, you have properties that come in, say, 5-10 years down the road after they were damaged, and you're trying to determine whether or not they need to come up to current regulatory standards, so substantial improvement or substantial damage. What, is there, do you still apply that pre-event, like if this was a structure that was damaged, do you still apply 10 years later the tax assessed value pre-event?
Right.
Or is there a time limit?
Right. So first thing, what happens? So the question is, an event like Helene, where you have a structure that's damaged, but we're looking at it like 5 years down the road. They come back to repair it way late. You know, what value they're using. So first thing what happened is you should have already gone out and visit that structure to determine whether it was substantially damaged or not and notify the property owner. Doesn't mean that they're going to do anything with it. They've gotten it notified. You should keep that paperwork in perpetuity so you've got it in your file. When they come in finally 5 years later to get the permit, regardless who's there, it should be able to go in the file and say, okay, this was substantially damaged back in 2024 with Helene. Now you want to bring it into compliance. We look at our current ordinance and then make the determination of what it's going to cost, what's the project cost to bring it up to, you know, whatever they're going to do with their project. I mean, in 5 years, that thing could really be in bad shape. We don't know. It may just need to be torn down or condemned at some point. It just depends on how badly it was damaged and whether it's salvageable or not. If it's completely gone, then it's new construction. You just start with a new permit process. So, but hopefully you're not in a position where you're having to look back 5 years later to, you know, it may happen, but you know, hopefully not.
We've got the 5-year clause, so like in some cases, 4
So you have
years,
cumulative.
they remodel their kitchen. So I've got a record of that, but I'm using a weighted calculation to
Right.
say, yes, now your value is
Okay.
this, and you need to, you know, use the X amount of dollars to repair your damage, so yes, now it's SD because you're
Okay, that's a
remodeling
good
your
point.
kitchen, even though back then it was only $110,000 house.
So Wetumpka County's got cumulative substantial improvement, substantial damage. So they look at a 5-year period. But once you make the, and there's information in that substantial improvement, substantial damage desk reference to deal with those, whether it's 5 or 10-year cumulative SISD situations. So as Whitney was talking about, you get your initial assessment. It's not a substantial improvement for this particular renovation, but they're still tracking that cost. And then you might see a slight increase in the value of that structure because they've made some kind of renovation to it. And then you have some damage or another improvement. So then how do you calculate that? So you follow that formula, and as long as you're keeping your records, that you should be able to manage that. So, you know, some cases, even though the value of the structure is more, may receive some damage and become substantially damaged during that 5-year period.
So let me throw something else in there about SD and SI. So, and I'll use Nate and Angie and they didn't do anything wrong during their thing, but they said they developed their own spreadsheet or processes for determining substantial damage. So on the Wednesday before the storm, I sent out to all my communities, and it had the substantial damage reference, spreadsheets, the tool, and all that in there. Just remember that if you do and develop your own stuff, that substantial damage estimator and substantial damage tool has built into it what they are looking for. Whereas, you know, if you're going to do that, then you potentially need to pull that information over into your stuff so it meets, because I know after the JFO, the Joint Field Office, was set up, even when it was in Hickory or whatever, and you guys were getting visits from FEMA, and they were asking for this to be sent in on a monthly basis, and that was a big issue, that there were multiple floodplain administrators. Well, I didn't know how to do that. You know, and I'm gonna go out the bat for all of you guys, and if there's any commissioners or council in here, I'll just say it straight up. You adopted an ordinance to agree to enforce this ordinance to get subsidized flood insurance and other disaster-related benefits after an event, okay? And one, let your floodplain administrator do their job. Two, you owe it to that floodplain administrator to send them to get the necessary training that they need to do. And three, don't circumvent what they're trying to do because you have a political buddy. Politics is a dirty, ugly 5-letter word, okay? I know it's rampant in all your counties. I don't like it. I got screwed by it years ago and I don't like it. So in the event of happens again, figure out, or before it happens, figure out what your community is going to do to adopt whatever tools, processes that you need to work with. And then what I was gonna say is FEMA start asking for those monthly, everybody's sending them in on a monthly basis, so substantial damage trackers, if you will, they're looking. So with that said, okay, so Ann's got 10 substantial damage properties in Black Mountain. All right, Whitney's got 20 over there. So they go out and do visits. And they say, okay, well, Ann, 3 of them's already been something done. Well, do you have permits? And Ann says, no, I didn't know nothing about it. You see where I'm going? Whitney's got 20 over there and none of hers have been done, or they started and you've got, don't let them throw rocks at you, or don't let them get you caught. They're not doing it to trap you. They're just making sure you're doing your job. Because as was said this morning, or yesterday, the nonprofits come in and they'll do stuff. Angie made mention of that this morning. They gutted the place out, they left it out. So now that we're post-storm again, no matter if, it's when another storm happens. I just hope it don't happen here. Let it go to the coast and we'll help them. But the bottom line is, get your processes and procedures in place and make it be in accordance with what FEMA is looking for. Then you've got less work to do at the end of the day. I see those reports come in because most of you copy me. If you're one of my communities, you'll copy me and Steve when you send it in to Valerie or Jerry or whoever's getting it. Then I've seen some come back, hey, we need to do this, this, and this, and this. So I know that the process has not been followed or you've left something off. Because the interpretation was way wider than the people in this room of how substantial damage should be done. A lot of people, and I'm not throwing any rocks here at all, but a lot of people say, okay, she's a building inspector, I'm gonna let them do substantial damage. Remember they had the slide this morning where there was 20 people lined up down at the bottom down there? So it is great, as Angie said, if you can incorporate, and I know we all wear 12 hats in one shop, okay? I know if you can incorporate building assessment, damage assessment from the emergency manager, substantial damage or substantial improvement from the floodplain administration piece of it, and all those other things that you might need into a single or a couple of visits, that's rather than 20 people going out and seeing these poor people because they're already devastated enough. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, it makes your job easier. That ain't gonna be nothing about that on the test, but for it to help you down the road from seeing what's happened almost a year ago, in 15, 16 more days, it'll be a year. It's been a rough year. So, yeah, go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
No, that's good. Just wanted to show what I'm gonna call the paper map. This is Eastern Band Cherokee Indians here in Jackson County. This is one of the streams. This is a limited detailed study stream, but you will likely see something like this on the exhibits rather than what you see in FRIS. So if you're used to using FRIS, you're spoiled. And we did it on purpose. We want to help you out. It's a tool to use. But when you're taking this exam, you're going old school, and you better be ready for it. So you might see this, or you might see grayscale or something else on the map. So be familiar with this. Also, make sure you know which way is upstream and downstream. So BFEs increase as we go upstream. So this is 1615 here and 1551 down here. So we're going this way. Water's flowing that direction. So if it's asking you what's upstream or not. Also, our cross sections in North Carolina are numbered. It's based on stream station. As the number increases, you're getting farther out In other places with FEMA's maps, they use lettered. That's why they call them lettered cross sections. They start at A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And as you go farther up the alphabet, you're going farther upstream. Okay, so just make sure. Also, what are these wavy lines here? They're BFEs. Is that the one you want to use when you're trying to make some kind of determination for anything? No, those are rounded to the nearest whole foot. You want to look at these cross-section values, and this is limited to detail, so that's all you're going to have on the cross-sections in the table. You won't see that on the CFM exam, but you would use for a detailed study your profile. And then you can check your answer on your profile by looking at the base flood elevations at the cross sections between where you're trying to measure. So say for simplistic purposes here, we're going to say BFE is 10 feet here and 8 feet here, okay, at this cross section. So it changes over 2 feet over this distance. If you are looking at a site here and you say that the BFE is 11, does that fall between 8 and 10? No. So something's wrong. You got to go back and measure again. Maybe you looked at the 500-year profile by mistake. So you can check the data just using the tools you have to find a reasonable answer that's there. Also, we always go to the upstream side of a structure and riverine situation. Why do we want to do that?
More conservative.
Be more conservative. It's the highest base flood elevation for that site. So you always use the highest BFE for your development purposes to make sure that it's not too low. Especially here in the mountains where you can see significant changes in elevation over a short distance. I mean, just from here to here is a 10-foot change in elevation.
What you saying is water be running downhill?
Yeah, it sure does. Any other questions? Now, coastal areas, they provide whole foot base flood elevations on the map. And you know, they're pretty low too, like 15 feet, BE 15, AE 12. Those are typical for coastal elevations. Here in the mountains, this is already up to 1,605 feet.
Whitney, go ahead.
Is the LIMWA, is that the equivalent of the extent of BE?
No, the LIMWA is the limit of moderate wave action. So the BE zone has a greater than 3-foot wave. That's part of the base flood elevation calculation. So they look at surge and some other things, but we include this wave height. And the wave height is the top of the crest of the wave to the trough of the wave. You know, look at that. So that's where waves are greater than 3 feet in the V zones. The LIMWA is the landward limit where we dissipate down from a 3 to 1.5 foot wave, and the 1.5 foot wave, once we're lower than 1.5 feet, that's the limit of moderate wave action. The area of moderate wave action would fall typically between the V zone and that LIMWA line. And because 1.5 to 3 foot waves can cause significant damage to structures, FEMA is recommending, as does the building code require, I think, that you meet coastal high hazard standards for those structures in those areas to reduce damages. And typically on the Outer Banks, say we won't see a LIMWA because the V zone is defined by the toe of the primary frontal dune. So when the V zone is defined by the PFD, you won't see a LIMWA come behind it. Typically, we'll see where the fetch comes across the sound, and you'll have a V zone on the land inland side of the coastline, and then you'll have that additional wave that pushes through and then drops off. Yes, Ann?
Can you talk a little bit about increased cost of compliance?
Okay. Increased cost of compliance is part of the flood insurance policy. Provides up to $30,000 for, bringing the structure into compliance with the current regulations, following a claim. It has to be associated with a claim. The $30,000 cannot exceed, or the addition of that $30,000 cannot exceed the maximum for the policy itself. So for single family residential, $250,000 is the max of coverage, right? For the building, show the table. So if you had the full coverage of your policy, you had a $200,000 claim, you could get up to $30,000 of coverage on ICC because you don't exceed the $250,000. If, say, your $250,000 policy, you got a claim for $245,000, the most you could get was $5,000. But once you go hit that $250,000 ceiling, you don't get any more money above that. So it's not really like an additional, it is additional money, but it can't exceed the maximum coverage of the building based on whatever policy you have. So again, non-residential or some other residentials have higher thresholds, but and you know, that money can be used to match like an FMA grant or other mitigation grant to elevate the structure or bring it into compliance. Yes.
Does it have to be, I can't remember right now, does it have to be substantially damaged
No.
and then they get this ICC, or just they have to pay into it and then they just get it as an additional?
They have to request it from and there has to be some code enforcement action. So typically it does require a substantial damage notification or notice, but there could also be requirements outside of that to bring it into compliance, because it's not necessarily, if I'm not mistaken, it's could be any development requirement. I think I have to go back and look at it. I'll have to look it up for you and in the insurance manual just to verify that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I'm gonna find the manual real quick. I think I have it on my, I have to look it up. Let's see if it's in this document. It has to be declared substantially damaged or repetitive loss. So again, it could be that 2 claims of at least $1,000 over a 2-year or 10-year period, or declared substantially damaged. And again, it's up to $30,000, but not guaranteed. And it does have to be requested when they, as part of their filing for the insurance claim. Now, typically what's going to happen is they're going to call their policy, or call their insurance company, and the adjuster is going to come out, and they might get there before you do to do your substantial damage. As long as you submit that letter to them within a reasonable time period after that, then they can, update the claim to include the ICC information.
So this is just something additional that's offered after it's been damaged to bring it into compliance is not something that the homeowner has to pay for this coverage.
They pay for it with their premium. It's a additional charge on their policy, but everybody's required to pay it on their policy. So you don't get the choice. You're paying for it anyway. Also, and I don't know if they've changed the rule on this or not, that it used to be that the structure had to be in the special flood hazard area in order to get the ICC money. But, you know, the structure, but if you have a policy in an X zone, you're still paying into the ICC pool because you're still having to pay that charge. So that's a little bit, you know, you're paying for something you're not going to get, but it's just the way it works.
It's only paid out to special flood hazard area?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And again, I think that's because of the substantial damage piece of it, because you don't have to do an SD determination on an X zone property. And it does have to be damaged by flood. I will say that cannot, you know, it has to be a flood claim related issue. So here's that statement here that I was talking about. The combination of the claim and the ICC can't exceed the maximum value of the, or maximum benefit available for a structure. Any other questions, things you need to know, not comfortable with?
Mm-mm.
Benefits of the community rating system. Well, typically they're going to be have some higher standards, and really what the program is designed to do is incentivize those higher standards and other activities to make your community more resilient against flooding. Whether that's communicating risk to your citizens, reaching out specifically and trying to address repetitive loss, severe repetitive loss. There's a lot of different activities communities can get points for, warning systems, that sort of thing. And they get discounts based on the number of points. So for every 500 points you get a 5% discount. So class 9 to class 1.
It works much like your fire department at home. ISO is the person in charge of that rating. The lower your fire department is rated, from a class 9S on down to 1, you get a discount on your homeowner's fire insurance. If you're a CRS community for the National Flood Insurance Program, everybody that's not a participating community in the community rating system, or CRS, is at a class 10. So like Steve said, for every 500 points, you drop down, you get a class 9, that's a 5% reduction. You get a class 8, you have to have 1,000 points, get you a 10% reduction. It does, as he said, it does come with higher standards. You put like publications in your vestibule or in your where people can see them. You put stuff on your website, get stuff, all that points, stuff in your library. He mentioned warning systems for flood hazard areas, like I'll use Caldwell County and down the road a few miles as an example. They have the Wilson Creek that's tied up to, goes up into Avery and Watauga up in that area, and it's a mecca for summertime tubing and camping and all that. But it comes up really quick if it floods bad. So, or if storms comes up, lightning or whatever, they want people to get out of there. So they did a very good job of putting the working with everybody concerned to put sirens in there, so the sirens activate and let people know, hey, when these sirens activate, get the crap out of Dodge, you know, because it's fixing to get bad. Then, as Steve also said, you make greenways. So crsresources.org, www.crsresources.org is your location for that, and they just came out with the new 2025 coordinators manual. You'll see the 9 categories. Some of them you may fit into, some of them you may not. You're going to get what you earn. You know, there's a couple of class 1s around, Steve. Charlotte.
Charlotte's a class 2. Yeah. That's the highest we have in the state. There are about 3 class 1s in the country.
Most everybody in North Carolina will hover around an 8 or a 9. There's a few of the smaller communities that choose to do CRS or class 9, because we, the state, give you almost 450 of the 500 points for what we do for you for training, the free of sight mapping, and other the general technical assistance that we give you. That helps, and then you come up with another less than 100 points, and you're a class 9 CRS. Let me give you some advice. It used to be, and you may hear this, that only the properties in like the 100-year floodplain or whatever got the discount. Now everybody gets a discount instead of just partial. If you are, everybody wants to be in your people may push you to be a 6 or a 7, but with every step of the way, there is that much more work that you, the floodplain administrator, have to do. So if you're a one-shot dude and you've got hats that you turn every click, and you're a fire marshal, the floodplain administrator, the zoning administrator, the janitor, the grass mower, to think about. Also, this is the realism. I don't think my boss will scold me, but some would scold me for saying this. How many flood policies do you actually have in your community? And is CRS worth the effort for 10 or 1? Because there are communities, I have communities that have 1 flood policy. I have communities that have 0 flood policy. So you take a look at all things considered for what you want to do. Steve's got a graphic up here on the board showing 96 CRS communities in the state. And that's up from about 60 since I started in 2009. The premiums are $49,622,950 for 72,089 policies. There's one, what is that? Class 2. There's 10 class 5s, 14, so you get down to 7, it's less, but then 38 is where the majority of the folks are. And it used to be that you had a cycle visit every 3 years, 5 years, and now, like your elevation certificates, you would keep every one of those in perpetuity, and they need to be filled out completely, and they're sent in now to a private reviewer for review. Do you have a young lady?
We just confirmed level 5 again.
Where is we?
Wilson,
okay.
Yeah. And we've had 3 reviewers for that cycle.
So, come on, help us out here. What have I not said that's beneficial to the group?
Don't wait until they announce that you're going to have a review, because you have to send in plans and GIS data and so much more maps and stormwater maintenance. I'm trying to think of the different things. So set up your files now, and if you have a system, and go through and see, like he said, is it beneficial to get more points? And with some of the regulation changes, we almost lost our 5 because we lost a whole bunch of points that got removed. And so just constantly be thinking of it. We have started, because of this last cycle, we're going to be having a quarterly meeting about it, and then making sure all of our stuff is ready to go when that time comes, because it was a headache to get different reviewers and say, okay, I need this in 24 hours, and we have a small staff, so it's like, well, I can't access that information. Can somebody else do it really quick? And
so in an effort to help her along, there used to be different review people for different things. So what Ann saw was important, might not be what Whitney saw or what she saw, so you would get a different score. You with me? So they kind of helped that out.
Yeah. And then communicate with your planners too, because sometimes your planning department doesn't understand that your stormwater team has things in place. Like, we have a stormwater issue tracker, so every 2 weeks we have a meeting to talk about these problems in the community. Well, our planning department didn't know that. She was like, well, that gets us points. Like, okay, cool.
I'll go back over to Angie and Nate and those guys this morning. Communication is key to the whole business.
Absolutely.
Know who's in your shop. Angie said she went around the EOC and she got to know everybody that was around her. I don't doubt that bubbling young lady talked to everybody and got the information, and she shared information as much as she got. In North Carolina, we have the North Carolina Building Code Council, and we adopt the North Carolina Building Codes, right? the standard, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but the standard for CRS is the ASC 24, of which some of ours are different. So she said she didn't get some of the points or lost some of the points. So you're not gonna get full credit for everything on the building code because North Carolina doesn't adopt the ASC 24 totally, okay? If I tell you from a CAV standpoint, you know, when do you start preparing for a CAV to relate to what she said for CRS? You should be preparing for a CAV every day. If you start and do your floodplain management every day or every time someone comes in and you maintain that and you prepare your list and your files and you keep that, then when I come up and say, or in her case, Matthew or Aaron, whichever, you're in East or Central.
I don't know.
Are you east of 77 or on this side of 77, or 95 rather?
Well, we're on east of 95.
You're, okay, then your areas. So the bottom line is, if we come to do a CAV, I gotta do a CAV in a month. I gotta get prepared. All she's preparation she should have to do is get her stuff out and put it on the table where we can come look at it. Or send it to us in advance, let us look at it. Because she's doing her job, okay? The people that have to go digging and scratching for ECs and all that other stuff ain't doing their job to start with. I'll just call a spade a spade. It is what it is. Same thing for CRS. She said, stay in preparation, stay in communication, get what you got, know who your people around you are, what they can bring to the table, and now she's gonna start having quarterly meetings about CRS annual review to maintain your whatever. Guys, the adage, and I'm not fussing at y'all, it's your people I would fuss at, your councils. The adage of we don't need floodplain management until somebody wants to build in a floodplain is BS. That's as big a BS as I can pile it up, okay? If you do it, if you're gonna belong to this program, then your council needs to say, you're the lady, you're the lady, you're the lady, you do your job, here's the ordinance that we've adopted, do it. Don't backdoor me and say, this is Billy Bob, he contributes 10 figures to the election. That's BS. I'm serious. I'd tell them if they were sitting here, he probably wouldn't fire me for saying it. I'd retire before he'd fire me. It can't take him that long to get paperwork done. So, I've been threatening him with that for a year now. He's worried about when I might pull that trigger. I told him I'd let him know all the good times. But it is what you make of it. If you are a floodplain manager, do I like it? No. Does anybody like regulations? No. But if you were the 110 or 11 deceased citizens and you could back up and do what you did over again, would you have done anything different? I bet you 110 of them would say yes. And when we, as governmental officials, I don't have no authority in your communities, y'all do. Remember Steve said very first thing, floodplain management is done where? Locally. If we have enforced these rules as we agreed to do, then yes, I have a bleeding heart too. But Grandma, Grandpa, if you'll build that house up, chances are you sit on your front porch and not have to worry about the house being torn down by the water. Or it ain't gonna float off its foundation because there wasn't no vents in it. I could tell you stories till doomsday about Haleen. I could have had a whole day. I told Steve at lunch, I could have did a whole day and a little bit of what I said this morning about the antics of Haleen. The do's and the don'ts, lessons learned. So if you people go back and talk to your people and say, hey, we need more CFMs. Oh, I don't want to send you to school. Okay, then why don't you give me the job to do? I'm serious. I see it every day, 365 or that's whatever days I take off, I see it all the time. I'm thankful for the few people that are willing to come here, either RCFMs or gonna be, yeah, you're gonna be, you'll keep doing it.